The greatness of the Talmud. As many of you know, I personally subscribe to the view that the Talmud is one of the greatest intellectual products in Western civilization. Nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with belief or theological concern, or who did it, who didn't do it, Baruch HaKodesh. It's all as it stands. The Talmud material, to me, is on a level with Newton's apple, with the scientific revolution that opened up the 17th century and forced a reconstruction of everything, including Torah, because we're still going on the momentum of the medieval world of the Rishonim, especially the Rambam. And there comes a point where one has to realize that what the medieval world was, and it is now in our time totally, but totally out, surpassed. If you look at the Meforshim, for example, you look at the Ramban, when it comes to cosmology, theological things, if he were here today, he would say, if you follow what I said, you degrade the Torah system. But when it comes to politics, it comes to the artistic world, the psychological world, well, who's going to compare with the Ramban? I mean, then you're in the big league of the Rishonim. So that is relevant, very relevant. But there are other things that are not at all relevant for the contemporary picture. For me, the Talmud per se is one of the great contributions of Western civilization. So the question is, obviously, what makes it so different? The first point is that there was a Roman law. And as you know, in history, the development of Roman law was very, very big and very strong, very powerful, and it had then become the paradigm for legal systems in England and the rest of the civilization. And so even for today, we still build on the basic understanding in Roman law. I think in 333 was the Constantine or whatever, but this was the Roman law. Okay, but the Roman law, as great as it is and was, first, some of the people studied with the Chazal people, with Amoraim, because we already had in Judaism an established legal structure and legal material. Even though a lot of it was Baal Peh, oral, nevertheless, there was a lot of interchange between the Roman jurists and the Torah thing. Okay, fine, but so we came first. Big deal. So we were first. Or okay, but where's the greatness? Where's the greatness? Surprisingly as it may seem, the greatness as I see it does not reside in the content of the halakha, in the content of the law. Meaning by content, rules for living, rules for behavior, rules for the individual, rules for groups, rules for the Tzibur, the nation as a whole. You know, these are rules organized, and this is one significant fundamental part of what we call the Talmud. It was originally Baal Peh, and that's very important. But it was written down because of a number of reasons, especially that it would be forgotten and so on. And so in order to be preserved, we put it down in writing at a certain point in time, and then this became a written text, not an oral transmission. I stress that because for me, the greatness of the Talmud is not only in the legal analysis of different topics, we'll talk about that soon, but in the fact that it was embedded, all of this legal talk, like lawyers talking, how to write up cases and so forth, like lawyers talking about what's going on here. This whole thing was was embedded in a field of ideas, what I call an ideational field, which in the literature has come down as the narrative. There's the nomos, the law, and the narrative. So the first point is that for any legal system that's developed, one should not take a too narrow view that what it is a set of rules, period. It's a set of rules, yes, but it's a set of rules embedded in something that's live, that's much more alive than the set of rules. It's the people discussing and going back and forth on the issue, and that was the Baal Peh character. Furthermore, it was built on conversation. What I discovered in my work is that even in the Chumash world, the paradigm is a conversation. How? Well, because what happens in conversation? All forms of language enter in a 10-minute slice of conversation. Advice, justification, excuse, okay, justify, imperative language, do that, command, and of course the most important thing, the performative, the chalos, namely statements that a person makes on himself, which are really proclaiming, I am Jewish, proclaiming, I am a Torah man. That's not a statement which is true or false, it's a declaration. So that there are these assertion statements, imperative statements, true-false statements, and then in topics, historical, linguistic, and the full array of topics that are covered in this ideational material. So for me, what's distinctive and the greatness of the Talmud is not just the law, but the embodiment of the law in this ideational field, based on the content, on the idea of conversation. And you know, spontaneously, you can take a slice, 5-minute slice of conversation, and then you could see right away. You start off, one person is talking, you don't talk at the same time, you can't hear. So one person talks, the other person talks, the other one answers a question, and all of a sudden, bingo, it switched, the other person takes over and is doing, if you had a tape, you know, you see the other person is taking over and you hear his voice and not the other one, and then you see all this interchange. Quick, instantaneous shifts back and forth from one mode of language to another mode of language. And one of the things that I personally discovered, we're going to do more with that, but I discovered was that by being a philosophy person for all my intellectual life, I overlooked the fullness of language, the fullness of the human being as it relates to understanding things. I was a truth man. Truth means, what does it have to do with the person? Nothing. Do we worry in mathematics that we have to take an examination of Hilbert and of his life? I read the biographies. I enjoyed reading Hilbert's biography and the other biographies of mathematicians and scientists and so on. But, I mean, what does it have to do? Or philosophy. Hilbert used to give his course, he used to walk in and say, well, what is mathematics? We're going to do mathematics. Well, tell you the truth, I don't really know. But I don't really care. Now we can do mathematics. In other words, that's where we are. A philosophy of mathematics is a field for the philosopher, but not required for the mathematician. Some mathematicians were more prone to philosophical things, and they use them and develop and so forth. However, I oriented myself. How it came is a long story. We'll talk about that. But I oriented myself to truth, to understanding, to argument, which meant to assertions. Assertions are either true or false. And as you know, and we'll pick it up in some other time, I went into philosophy with a God problem. Namely, I had problems when I was young for identity and so forth. I said, well, if you have to believe in God, what does that mean? And I said, well, it means like a principle of explanation or a principle of justification. And I said, well, I don't really believe that. And so, you know, I called myself a Torah person, but I always added, but I don't really believe these things. I don't know, because to explain something, you want to you explain something on the basis of something that's more rational, more understandable. But to explain something on an unknowable, to explain something on something that has itself loads of questions, is not explanation. That's not justification. So I never could internalize it. But I did internalize philosophy, but was concerned with the mind, with truth, at the negation or at the expense of the rest of the person. And it took 40 years, as I said, to graduate out and realize that I was going along on 2 cylinders when I could go along on 4, or like I had in the States, a big Ford V8 engine. I was firing on 2 cylinders instead of 8. And that was a tremendous realization. It went together with the whole breakthrough, which we'll talk about. But this was the picture. So, to come back to our point, the basic point is here that the Talmud is a legal system that's embedded in an ideational field which deals with anecdotes, in a sense, softening up, shall we say, putting in a wider context, making problematic obligation, duty. A legal system has a set of rules which you're obligated to do. You have duty. The key term is not rights, the key term is obligation. You're obligated to fulfill these laws, these mitzvot. So, when you make it a statement, Hashem commanded, you have to do the mitzvah. Well, that's not the Torah system. The Torah system says, yes, Hashem commanded, you have to do the mitzvah. But when you read and put it in the ideational context, well, it turns out that it's not so strict. There's all kinds of conditions. It's not, Hashem said you must do. It's not authoritarian in the last analysis. And so putting it in this ideational field is really functioning to widen up and enrich the concept. Because to follow a rule is very highly intellectual. The mind gets the first input of the rule. But to follow the rule involves the body, involves the emotions, involves the whole full person. So we have a kind of a tension between the two dimensions. So that's what, to me, is the greatness of the Talmud, that we had this Baal Peh field of ideas that tapped into the feelings, the body, the emotions, and so forth. Okay. Just, B'derech Agav, as an aside, for 1 minute, I'm not going to spend any time on it, the fundamental idea in the legal system, in the Talmud, and in any great legal system, is what was called the law of things and the law of persons. The whole system is built on performatives, on establishing legal statuses in certain kind of conditions with certain kinds of consequences. So if a child at age 3 over here says, Hareyat Mekudeshet Li, legally, nothing occurred. Legally, there's nothing on the tape. But, in fact, there is something on the tape. The child said, Hareyat Mekudeshet Li, marry me and here's the ring. Well, legally speaking, nothing happened. And there are no consequences of what. But causally, observationally, something did happen. Matter of fact, somebody cried in the middle. And so that's right on the tape. And something happened. So the first point to understand is that the systems of law, halacha included, the Talmud, was based on the establishment of legal statuses and their consequences. So you could ask about eating rules for eating. So certain food, if it was done in a certain way, blah, 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 is kasher. It's kosher. You can eat it. Okay? You have the obligation upon you to eat it. Okay? Sometimes it's a permission. You're not obligated from the point of view of the overall, but if you eat it, it has to be kosher. It has to be kosher is a legal status that's established by a whole pattern of conditions, legal status, and consequences. Now, the basic point is here, at this point, that in the legal system there's the law of persons and the law of things. What does that mean? That means where is the legal status located? The legal status could be located on a person. Mr. X, you cannot do this, should not do this. Or, let's take the food example, the legal status could be on the food. The food is forbidden to me. So we have the law of things, the law of persons. And that's fundamental in the Roman law, it's fundamental in contemporary law, in law schools, and it's fundamental in the Gemara. As an aside, a very important one, I'm not going to spend more than 1 minute, but for those people who learn the Gemara, learn the Talmud, and have come into the modern picture, they should understand that the word in Hebrew for thing is chafetz, and in Yiddish or term chefza. Now there was a development of the legal system that went into the 19th century in Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Chaim, the grandfather of the Rav Soloveitchik, which was based on the concept of chefza. And chefza meant f of x. In logic we have x and we have functions of x. So we call it f of x. X in Yiddish and in Hebrew is called chefza. That's the word you use. So the word thing in the Soloveitchik development of halacha has nothing to do with the law of things and the law of persons. It applies both to the law of things and the law of persons, because it has to do with logic. It has to do with the function. But the function could be, the performative, the status could be on the thing or on a person. I say this now, and that's the end of it for tonight, because so many people who I've heard over the years in different talks and so forth and writing have confused terribly so, have confused the word chefza with the word thing, chefetz, in the idea that one is a content distinction between the law of things and the law of persons, and the other one is a distinction in logic. In other words, he constructed the halachic system in a way where you can talk about the functions of the chalos, the functions of the performative. And one thing could have two performatives or three performatives and so on. And the famous joke about brisk Rav Soloveitchik type halacha was, they call it shnei dinim. There are two dinim, there are two laws. Well, in functions, you could have more than one function. What's the problem? So this was the joke, that you made big chidushim, big innovations in chidush, in understanding the Rambam and the Gemara by this thing, by saying, wait a minute, there are two functions operative here. And they can be operative at the same time. And so then people start talking about, chefza. But then they give you an example from the law of things, law of persons. These two things have nothing to do with one another. Some other time we'll talk about that in more detail of what that involves, but I mention it now as just a pure aside for those people who are learning and may be confused on this particular point. Okay. So, when we enter into this law, nomos and narrative, we realize that the narrative, the whole ideational field, includes in it reasons for the law. Like in jurisprudence. In Western jurisprudence, there were thing as the law, and then there was the reason for the law, or what was called the spirit of the law. And I have a number of books that anybody who did the jurisprudence literature knows. This was a fundamental distinction and still remains in a legal system. In other words, it's not just the rules, it's the rules that have a package of reasons that enter into the picture. And in the brisk tradition, it prided itself on abstracting from the doing of the mitzvah and the rule, the reason for the mitzvah and how it functions. It abstracted from that to deal with the rules per se and how they cohere logically and make an integrated system. Now that's a big thing, because the more coherence you have in a system, the more you can highlight the things that are missing, that are incoherent, that are incomplete. And so you have a principle of advance built into the way you learn, of trying to see that, well, this coherence works this way, and then logically it should say this, but it says something else. Why? And then you pursue. So conceptual coherence, this wasn't an argument against conceptual coherence. As we do in science, we have conceptual coherence. In anything intellectual, coherence is a big factor. But not the only factor when we come to things that our subject matter is not just the rules, but the function of the rules, the reason for the rules. And so the whole idea of reasons for the mitzvot become a fundamental category. I outgrew them in the beginning and now grew back into them as part of the revolution that made me realize, and there are other aspects we'll talk about, but it made me realize that I have jumped over, haven't put myself enough into the picture from the point of view of reasons, action, and so forth. Okay. So, I'm going to make a transition now to the relevance, the importance and the relevance of the Talmud, of the Gemara. Now, there have been in the news here and there people who are political who have said we should redo our whole system here and build it on the halakha. I'm not concerned now with any kind of a practical issue or with Sanhedrin. I'm just concerned with the where we seem to be going. I'll put it this way. Okay, so the return to Tamei HaMitzvot, reason for the law, for me, took on the fundamental character of what we can call life in the broadest sense of the term. Chaim, or life in the broadest sense of the term, which in effect means everything. Because from the point of view of experience, the human being, experience is part of life, or coterminous with life, and experience relates to the emotions, to the feelings, to the body, to the mind, to beliefs, to everything. And so life is the fundamental reason, the fundamental jurisprudential reason for the law. Okay? Now, freedom, justice, morale, other things, yes, they could say, well, look, I'm not taking life, it's too broad, you can't work with it, or for whatever reason, I'm going to take something that's narrower, justice, freedom, equality, other political values. Fine. For me, the Torah system says, out of this choice of political, social, ideological values, we're taking life as the fundamental thing. And in the Chumash, l'chai bohem, to live in accordance with these rules. Okay, why that's the case, we'll have plenty of time to talk about in different contexts to indicate why and what's the importance of this and how does it really function in the actual patterns that you make in terms of reasons for the law. Okay. One point that I want to stress is that not only does life relate to cognition, feelings, action of the person, but the input on life can come and does come from a wide array of fields. Of course, if we start dealing with biology, the biological sciences, okay, and psychology and sociology, well, they're dealing with life, with institutions, with people, with interactions, and so on and so on. Okay, but there's been an emphasis given our thrust today, especially in the contemporary world, for the value of scientific organization, scientific points, empirical, correlation, statistical, and so forth, whatever, given this as the thing, we have overstressed in relation to reasons for the law. Reasons, that's our focus now, reasons for the mitzvot. We have overstressed in the contemporary period the reasons that would come in from biology, physiology, psychology, and we have negated or left alone reasons that come in from all walks of life, especially the arts. People, musicians, poets, writers, novelists, movie people, and so on. This is part of our culture. And in these novels and in this material, whether it's a visual form or a musical form, there are inputs that are related to what the reason, related to life as the reason for the mitzvot, and what in life, what, how do we get details? So we have to fill in an abstract word like life with a whole package of details, all of which are part of this picture, but they're coming in, or should be coming in, from the full array of human activities. The business world, the technological world, and especially the world of music, the world of poetry, and so forth. So we have the input from the psychosocial and the biopsychological, and so forth. And furthermore, because the system, the content of these mitzvot was unduly or very, very big, very comprehensive, in the sense that it dealt with the two main functions or characteristics of life, which are eating and sexuality. And so in this legal system, which we're talking the Talmud, it has an aspect that has been bypassed by the law. The law doesn't give you manuals on how to relate to your wife. That's left as privacy. You're an individual, you have privacy, what you do and so forth. You can read books and learn and understand better and study human relations and so on and so on, but it's not built into the legal framework. But in the Talmud, these topics, aside from sacrifices and all the rest, we're not going to talk about tonight, but these topics, two fundamental characteristics of life, are eating, the whole world of eating domain, and sexuality. So what's come to life as fundamental in contemporary Western civilization, and the Orient as well, but what's come to life as focus is exactly eating and sexuality. I'm not interested now with the causes, whether it came out from the psychoanalytic dimension, the sexual revolution. There's a program on Channel 8 I happened to see the other night, the same thing. Beautiful programs on there. There was one on the Kinsey Report and the whole development. Here was one on Mae West and Jacquella, or whatever her name was, a movie star or something. And they interviewed the actress that played it, and she said, well, when they interviewed her, she said she had no problem of being nude in front of a camera and so on. Well, for a lot of people, they wouldn't go nude in front of the camera. That's private. The whole idea of private in the public is a big thing in the whole, even in obscenity. Even in the concept of obscenity, which I worked on a number of years, and I used to give a beautiful unit in the philosophy course on the notion of obscenity. And one of the things had to do with making public that which was intrinsically private. So that was a distinction built into the concept of obscenity and the laws of obscenity. And the other factor was one, making public what was intrinsically private, which had to do with intercourse and so on and so on. And the second component was making animalistic what is distinctive of the human. So, in The Godfather, highest pornography. There's a split-second take of 10 seconds where the horse is slaughtered in the guy's bed, full of blood. 10 seconds! not even, and it goes dark. The film goes black, and it goes to the next thing. That's pornographic. It's degrading something. Sure, it was wrong. This is the Godfather. This is the underground. But these are human beings. It's like Sartre wrote on The Respectful Prostitute. In other words, they're not zero. They're not animals. We say they do animal-like behavior, but it's animal-like. It's not an animal. So all of that whole dimension was built into the understanding of the pornographic. So making something animal, whether it's in writing or in vision or whatever, was the other ingredient that I developed in the whole concept for that unit that I used to give. It was beautiful. Went over very big because students were interested in eating and sexuality. I mean, as we say, bestseller. Okay, so the point I'm making now is that the inputs concerning life, the filling in of an abstract term like life, has so many different aspects, and we should include in that fields that we ordinarily would say are exceptional and pushed to the side, namely, especially the scientific picture, but especially the world of the arts, the world of music, the world of poetry, the world of collection, and so on and so on. Okay. The reason I say that, you'll see right away. Relevance. Relevance. What is the relevance? Remember, this is an old text. And we're talking now about the text of the Talmud, the greatness of the Talmud, not the greatness of the halakhic system. I'm mentioning that, I mean, I'm using it, but I'm trying to keep clear two different things. How the system has developed, and what the material was which constituted this Baal Peh, this ideational field. Now, the ideational field has continued in Midrash and in people who are following the law, learning the law, are sometimes their talk, you go to the Beis Medrash, sometimes their talk is theological, sometimes their talk is psychological, sometimes their talk is like the Baal Peh, the oral tradition. However, I'm not concerned so much today with the development. I'm concerned with the text that we have as a written down text of a Baal Peh ideational field. Okay. So one point is, as you understand, because of our contemporary problems in Israel and in the United States and other places, there's what's called the rabbinic establishment, which took the responsibility, whatever the history is not important for today, they took the responsibility to study and be transmitters of this legal system, nomos and narrative, of the what's called the Talmud. However, as it's gone on, the emphasis was on the law, and less so on the embodiment of the ideation. Well, we had Chassidut, and we had movements that tried to redress the balance of that, and have a kind of the realizing that the Talmud is both. It's not one instead of the other, bimkom, instead of the other. It's both together. So there have been movements of trying to do that, but the point is that there's been a dominance. It's in the process of being shifted. And the other point is that the responsibility for the making of this Talmud relevant is a responsibility of Kol Yisrael and not just the rabbinic establishment. If we start on a program, and I'm going to talk right away, if we start with the assumption that there's a group that are responsible for the development and the enrichment and the living accordance with it, and the love of the system and enjoyment with it, if that's a special group, if that's where we start, we will never make it relevant to Klal Yisrael as a whole. Our unit is Klal Yisrael, and not the rabbinic establishment. And that's very, very important. If we start with wholeness and unity, we have the possibility, the reasonable possibility of achieving it. If we start with polarization, we'll end with polarization. If we start with fragmentation, we'll end with fragmentation. If we say, not Chaverim Kol Yisrael, Chaverim Kol Yisrael, but I'm better than you. Well, start that way, and what will happen is the tendency will be development of extremes, and an indifferent middle is where we are. So 85% of Jews today are Jews, express Jewishness in various ways, but are certainly not lovers of the Talmud and the Baal Peh, which we call the nomos and narrative of the Talmud. So the responsibility belongs to all of Yisrael. Why do I say that? Relevance. We live in a world which, from the point of view of making relevant the Talmud, is a godsend. Since 1948, the time in which we live has a different halachic status than it had before that time. As you know, everything that exists is amenable to legal statuses, including geographical things, ecological things, and time. The time we live in has a special status, just like on a lower level, the time which we call the seventh day, Shabbat, the time has halachic, legalistic characteristics. That's what makes it part of the law. The holidays, the details and everything else make it part of the law, and that has special properties. Well, and now, since 1948, and the return of partial Jewry to Eretz Yisrael, and development of the state, the halachic, the legal character of the time has changed. Before that time we were in Galut, and after 1948 we are in the beginning of the Geula, which is the non-Galut process for Yisrael. So we're in the beginning, not at the end, in the beginning. And all this Mashiach talk and so forth is part of this flirting with the notion of the beginning. In the Hebrew language, it's Atchalta de Geula, the beginning of the Geula. That's not a philosophical term. That is a strict halachic term that depicts or says what the time is. What is the halachic character of the time? And to show I'm not talking through my hat, in the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Talmud incidentally is a combination of the Mishnah, a formulation of the laws, with the Baal Peh discussion. Okay, so in the Talmud, in Sota 9:15, part of the Mishnah, with the beginning, Ikvata de Mashiach, the beginning of the Mashiach, chutzpah will increase, presumption shall increase, and costs will be very high. The vine shall yield its fruit, but the wine shall be costly, very expensive, and the empire shall fall into heresy. And the empire shall fall into heresy, and there shall be none to utter reproof. The council chamber shall be given to fornication, Galilee shall be laid waste, and so on and so on. The people of the frontier shall go from city to city with none to show pity on them. The wisdom of the scribes shall become insipid, scorned, and they that shun sin shall be deemed contemptible, and truth shall nowhere be found. Children shall shame the elders, and the elders shall rise up before the children. For the son, a pasuk, dishonors the father, and the daughter rises up against her mother. The daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. From Micha, a pasuk, the face of this generation, of the beginning of the Geula, is as the face of a dog, and the son will not be put to shame by his father. Okay, the Mishnah adds, on whom can we rely? Only on our Father in heaven, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, I'm not concerned with the theological ending. but I am concerned with the description. Well, probably we are even open to fine-tuning this Mishnah and adding other aspects that are really either logically implied by, this is a big Mishnah, that are logically implied. What's implied by the increase of chutzpah? What kind of chutzpah? On who? How? Prevalence and so on. You know, in here there are a package of logical implications that we would fill the book on contemporary life relating to these topics. So, relevance. So if, since 1948, the time has changed, the legal aspect, the legal properties of the time we live in has changed, and it has nothing to do with beliefs, or what you believe and what you don't believe. The system says, here's the Shabbat, you don't have to do it. If you do it, you follow the rules, but there's no involvement of it. Here's the system. The halachic status of the time has changed for everybody. All Jews. It relates and it's changed. So, the question is obvious. Are there any legalistic, halachic implications from the change in the halachic status of the time we live in? For example, a guy comes to rabbis and he says, I want to convert and become Jewish. But you know, I fell in love with the mitzvot, I fell in love with the holidays, but I don't believe in God. The question is he automatically say, look, that's a fundamental condition. If you don't have that, you can't convert. We don't accept you. The committee turns you down. Okay? So, is that the situation? Or do we have to inquiry? Do we have to make an inquiry as to whether or not the factual properties of this time as depicted in this Mishnah and its implications has an implication for the answer that the rabbis give to conversion, such that maybe upon inquiry we'll see that the person who comes and wants to become a Jewish person does not require belief. Halachically, we're not talking philosophy, we're talking halacha. Are there halachic implications from one domain of the halacha to another domain? Well, that's part of the legal system. It takes laws in one domain, and because it mentioned in passing something about Sukkot, then that context, law in the context of Sukkot, now relates to the inyan of Sukkot, and so somebody could put together some logical implications and Mechadesh come out with a new rule or a new understanding of Sukkot, which had nothing to do with the issue. We're talking about something, but by the way, on the Derech Hagav, on the aside, it happened to mention Sukkot as an example. Why take that as just an example? Maybe there was something else in it. And so the halachic mind, bing, jumps, and he then pursues that. And lo and behold, certain times you get up with some insights that you didn't have before. And you write them up, and this is part of the ongoing of the tradition. So what's the point? The point is this change in the legal halachic status of the time has opened up a body of work to be done by Klal Yisrael, by all of Yisrael. We're going to start with the totality. We're going to say that a guy who's over here doing in business and a guy who's concerned with, he's a money man. This guy, he's only concerned with power. He'll kill his mother for advancement and so on and so on. Instead of all these details, we're starting off with the human umbrella called human beings. And we're not focusing attention on what makes them different. This guy has this affair, this guy has this affair. We're saying the responsibility for this type of question. What are the implications of the halacha of the time, built on the Mishnah and Sota? What are the implications, legal implications, for everything in Torah. So I proposed a practical proposal, and the technology is there to do it. It's not impossible. It's not like it was without the computer world, without the communication that we have. The technology is there to do it. I called it World Organization for Jewish Law. Happened to have my initials. It wasn't planned that way. I was just looking for some title, you know, WOJL. Okay, a world organization that will take as its responsibility the answering of one type question only. Namely, what are the halachic implications? First, the definitions. What is the definition of the time? And so on. And what are the implications? And it would come from everybody in Klal Yisrael, all walks of life. Of course, from leaders, from people, educators, and so it's not. You're not going to go to the Hamonan, people who are concerned primarily with life, living, and pursuit of happiness. But the leaders, the educators, the people leading the generations, have a responsibility to ask the question and answer the question such that we rebuild a Baal Peh. We rebuild an oral embodiment of the law. So as the law continues and gets trapped in rabbinic establishment and so on, side by side, there's emerging, or there should emerge, this world umbrella, which has in it people that you would never put together, that wouldn't sit together. The guy wouldn't sit together. The guy who's a Haredi guy, he looks down on everybody. He looks down on this guy, he wouldn't sit with him. But on this idea, well, the guy you're not sitting with, he may have some ideas, just like you have some ideas. It's not a monopoly. It's the responsibility of all Yisrael. And so, what we would have then, we talk about work for a Sanhedrin. In my view, if we come to the point where we do have a Sanhedrin, its primary work should be World Organization of Jewish Law, concerned with one question only: what are the implications of this period of time for everything in the halacha, and not limited to the continuation of rabbinic Judaism. That's one thing which has tremendous amount to it contribute, but not the total. Not the total. There's other aspects that can be contributed by other people precisely because they've had difficulties and were perplexed and went away and then came back and so on. Balei Tshuva and the like. I mean, there's insights, there's tons of material, personal things inside of these people which could play a role in this. The goal would be, we have Steinsaltz. I'm not going to talk about the contribution, but we're celebrating the Siyum HaShas and so on. It's certainly a big thing. Well, there's another place. So there's a Steinsaltz Gemara, right? And a special text, and you print it on the side, you know. There's another thing. We can take the traditional text, and we have to include on the side another column. Hilchot Atchalta de Geula, with respect to Shabbat, Kashrut, everything. And it says, Hilchot Atchalta de Geula, Shabbat, no change. In other words, upon inquiry, not that we know the answer. We don't know the answer. We haven't inquired. It wasn't real. It was a theoretical question. So there's minimum amount of work on the whole issue of the implication. I mean, it wasn't a live issue. So now we have to inquire, not take for granted that we know, or not build on the past Shiloh and Chuvot in the rabbinic establishment. Remember, I'm stressing, we're going back to the Gemara Talmud text. We're not going back to the development of the halacha or in any way belittling it. It was a tremendous advance in the halachic thing with posek and the whole rest of the thing. But at the same time, it has covered over something that has potential for the unification and reunification of the Jewish people. When, if we start in the beginning and we say, you're not an outsider, You're part of the group here. You're not an outsider. And what you say will be written down and looked at and everything together. And sure, there's dynamics, there's organization and how to do that and everything. To me, it's totally within the realm of possibility. It sounds crazy as hell. World Organization for Jewish Law. Well, what? Gonna have 50 factions? Mr. Computer will take care of 50 factions. No, we have the skills, the technological skills to make the organization and to start to fill it. Of course, it's not instant coffee. It's not instant halacha. It's not overnight. And people would be free to choose what topics they want to talk about. And when I outlined it in one of the books that I wrote, I actually put down a registration form. And part of the question was, what do you want to contribute? You don't have to contribute on everything. What's bugging you? What's bothering you in the halakha? What are things that you were disturbed about? The women right, women in this, that, the gender issue, or whatever. Whatever is bothering you, let's join forces, put it in this framework. And the goal is to have a column in the Gemara which says, Hilchad Atchalta the Gula, see Tosfos, blah, 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 see that. Why? Because these are the places in the Gemara, in this ideational field, where the topic that we're talking about, the particularization, is touched upon. But it's implicit. It's not out there. Then the Tosfos is not saying, I'm now talking about Hilchad Atchalta the Gula. Tosfos is he's relating to a topic, or to a Rashi, and he's relating to the Shakla V'Tarya of the conceptualization and the halacha. But in the side, there's a reference, and that reference now can play a role in this big definition of Chayim, of life. Responsibility of Kol Yisrael, and inputs from everybody. And starting off with wholeness, and so what we have here, for the point of view of relevance, is a great, great opportunity that's come out of the left field, just out of left field. Who would ever think? Who would ever think we'd have Eretz Yisrael? Okay, but who would think that we have a new halachic problem, relatively new, a halachic problem as to what is, how do we relate to all of this? And so, what have we done as Torah people? Where is it all? 65 years of the state. Well, we should have already had a literature, at least beginning literature, for the public, not for Sanhedrin, not for any practical purpose other than to inform the reader of the relevance. The relevance is built into this Mishnah. So we're starting with Klal Yisrael as a whole. We're starting with full relevance. And especially, and I emphasize it more and more, I see that we have, for whatever the reasons, have bypassed the fullness of these two fundamental properties of eating and sexuality, which, like Freud said, you can't drink a cup of coffee without anxiety. Western civilization is just chock full, well, of nuts, true, chock full of difficulties in the man-woman relation, which are taking apart the society. I mean, we're not just, first we had a sexual revolution and so on, but now we're beginning to move toward the center of that sexual revolution, and it is causing and involved with havoc, breakup of marriages, and so on and so on. So all of this was talked about. So we can talk about Hilchot Kedushin, marriage, Hilchot divorce, Gittin. It's a big Masechta. But what's in that Masechta is not only what was brought to it by the people who wrote it, but what's in the Masechta is what we're going to bring to it by asking a halachic question from today. So you think you understand Gittin? Because there's a sefer written by this one and by that one. Great people! The Rishonim, the Rambam, the Ramban, the Rashba, and so forth. The Ritva. The great, great work! But very, very incomplete. Very incomplete. They dealt with issues that were dominant in their time, in their orientation. This is medieval world. This is 14th century. 14th century? We're going to build on things from the 14th century? Well, when we reconstruct them, like when we're going to reconstruct the world of the Talmud, oh yes, when we reconstruct it. But per se, it will remain indifferent. Nobody will care. Nobody will have anything. Again, if we start with the responsibility of Klal Yisrael, we start with this pinpointed question. It's not philosophical. It's not up in the air. It's not amenable to speculations. The speculations are part of the inputs that will come in the formulation of an answer to each of the questions. What is the relation, halachically, between this and this? When it hit me so strong, I considered it a godsend. It's like, it's saying, wow, not only everybody, but the rabbinic establishment should take as part of its responsibility to lead the way, not to make opposition, but to lead the way in embellishing their own studies, which were emphasizing the law without the reasons for the law, without Chaim, and in the process have lost touch with Chaim, so a lot of Jews just bypass it. It's not saying anything. It's not relating. So I said, oh well, as an eitzah, as a suggestion, I said, well, instead of rabbinic establishing separating off, they should engage and lead, take a leadership role in putting up the finances for this organization, becoming part of the organization, putting forth some of their people as leaders of the organization, but not dominated by Haredi Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism. That's not the situation. We're concerned with something that affects all Jews, the change of the time, the change of the status, and the goal being the Maaseh. The goal is a specific goal. Namely, today we have the Gemara, but we don't have a column that says Hilchot Atchalta the Gula. See this Taisa, see this Rashi, see this Rashba, see that, see this, see that. Zeh Mutar, Zeh Asur, blah, blah. Well, yeah, that's the goal. So next year, meaning the next century, it'll take a century to do, or maybe less by being surprised. But the point is that we'll take our Gemara off the shelf, and this will be old-fashioned. Because we'll be missing a column on the Gemara that indicates this whole understanding. Okay, what I tried to do was just to throw out some ideas and that relate to my understanding of the greatness of the Talmud. Again, we're talking about the Torah Sheba'al Peh embedded in a system of rules, written down rules, and a reconstruction or rediscovery of a Baal Peh, so that this organization will not be concerned so much with persuasion, with politic, with anything other than trying to answer the questions to the best of the ability of the people involved. And I try to stress the role of the sciences, of course, and technology, and in addition, the wider picture of people in business, people from the world of the arts, to show that the input is so wide that there won't be anybody who won't find a place in it. There won't be anybody who will say, look, it's not for me, I'm out of it, you're not talking to me. Just formulate what's involved in making particular this notion of Chaim as the key reason for the mitzvah, and you'll find everybody's life will be inside the story. And if you start, and we start with the wholeness and the totality of Klal Yisrael, we'll have the best medicine, the best characteristic, which is Chaverim Kol Yisrael, the unity of Yisrael, and with minimal fragmentation and polarization. And so what I tried to do this evening was just to get across a number of points about the greatness of the Talmud that perhaps you wouldn't hear elsewhere, because they are a little bit on the radical side, and people would say, you're crazy. It's impossible. It is not impossible.